Thanks so much for coming on this beautiful sunny day. My name is Nadia Maria Oliva. I'm a freelance film series and talks and industry programmer, formerly at Netflix, BAFTA, and the Toronto International Film Festival. I'm very happy to be here today and be helming this conversation with our esteemed panelists. I'm just going to describe myself really quickly for you in visual terms in case that makes this session more accessible for you. I'm a woman in my mid-30s. I've got gold glasses on that probably have fingerprints on them and black hair and green eyes. Over the course of the next hour or so, we'll just be speaking amongst ourselves, and then I'll throw over to all of you and take some questions. So start thinking of those now. So here we are in 2024. This panel is called Storytelling Across Media, which is obviously quite a broad topic. And I think we know in 2024 that good stories can come from anywhere, and increasingly they can really look like anything. The business of storytelling is constantly evolving, and the last few years have only really accelerated the pace of change with shifts in how we engage with technology and, of course, all sorts of other curveballs in the mix. So the core of this panel is to explore and experiment with different ways of telling stories, and we'll tuck into each of our panelists' creative approaches to storytelling across film, TV, games, immersive, and more, and try to understand and answer the question of what it means and what it might look like to be platform agnostic. So I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. So here we have John Giwa-Amu, we have Eline van der Velden, and Neil McPhillips. Please welcome them. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So just to start off, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, describe yourself, and then maybe introduce a little bit of what you do.
All in one go? Yeah.
All in one go. Give it, yeah.
Hi, I'm John Giwa-Amu. I am around 6'2.5", half an inch shorter than my brother. And I am a mixed race man who has black hair and slightly more white hair in that than I'd like. And I run Good Gate Media, which is a TV, film, and gaming company.
Hi, I'm Eline van der Velden. I'm a femme-presenting non-binary person. I am wearing a flowery dress and have long blonde hair. Sometimes it's blonde, sometimes a bit grey. And I run Particle 6, which we make content for all sorts of platforms. We produce scripted content, drama, kids content, music videos, branded content, and you name it, for anyone and anything.
Hi, I'm Neil McPhillips. I am the co-head of games at Griffin. I'm a 5'9", white, bald man with a goatee.
You all did famously. So just to start off, what medium was your first foray into storytelling, and when did you start to think about maybe some other mediums you might want to give a go? Maybe we'll start with Neil this time.
So I guess my origin has always been in video games. That's kind of where I started, like 20-something years ago, when I think games were always kind of on the outer edges of storytelling at that point, and kind of not really taken too seriously in the medium. But over that time, I moved around. I was at PlayStation for 7 years, where I helped to run a program called Audience Broadening, which was basically about how do we bring people that aren't traditional gamers into this space. And it was a kind of 2-year project where we just kind of worked out how to get people that weren't kind of male 16 to 35 to play video games, basically. And when I was done with that, I moved to Channel 4 and helped them start getting into games as well, and kind of mixing and starting to understand the film and TV side a little bit more, and then moved to Griffin, which is a transmedia company. We make film and TV. We do film, TV, post-production, and we make video games. So the idea of just kind of, it was the first company I'd been to that truly understood the possibilities of blending those mediums and the kind of strength of everything that can kind of work together, and the tools that cross over, whether it be creative tools or technical tools. So I guess that's where I started.
Great, thanks. And we'll talk a bit later about kind of finding your audience. And so I think what you just said about trying to bring people into the games that wouldn't conventionally sort of be drawn to that will be an interesting thing to talk about. Eline, I'm curious about your background too.
I started in musical theatre, and there's a lot of comedy in musical theatre. So then I moved to doing comedy clips on YouTube, and then I did some films, and I did some TV series, and then I got asked to launch a few digital channels, and I did that, and then it just you flow from. I always say go where the wind blows, and we have recently started doing music videos for the biggest gaming company in China called MiHoYo Genshin Impact. So I think it's all about taking a great idea and then going it across all media, and I think it's a brilliant way to look at the real heart of the idea.
I'm curious too. I've read that with Particle 6, you have a scientific, creative approach to storytelling, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what that looks like.
Yes, so I did have a little blip in my career where I studied physics, and I love the analysis of content and why does something work. We had so many viral hits, and I was like, why? Why are they going viral? What is it that is making people want to share this content? And so we now, when we make a music video, for example, for the gaming company, we'll analyze all of the data that's behind it so that we can put, we can look at the comments, we can analyze the comments, we can analyze the fan behavior, we can put Easter eggs in the music videos so that they'll share it with their friends and see if they can spot them as well. So it's all about analyzing, improving, iterating, making the content better at every step. And I think that's key.
And John, where did you start with storytelling, and what sort of decisions have you made to sort of explore?
I started making short films, self-funded short films, film school, and then that went into feature filmmaking. And after making a few of those where we'd kind of got the critical acclaim for them, but I still wasn't able to really sustain a business, we started looking at other avenues of exploitation, such as film distribution first, and then simultaneously we partnered with a gaming company who then, in consultation with us, but the absolute vast majority of the work was on them, created a game from one of our pieces of intellectual property, a horror movie called Don't Knock Twice. The film did quite well in the box office, but as is life in independent film, we made absolutely no money out of it, which was very frustrating. However, the game went a long way to paying back all our investors, and it was made on a fraction of the price of the film. So that was the kind of first touch paper for getting into gaming.
Great. Do you find that, all of you have worked across, obviously married many different outputs at this point, and we don't really have a strong concept culturally of like what a Twitch show is or what a Snapchat show is or that sort of thing. Do you think that there's a certain freedom that comes with working within a medium that's maybe less defined on a storytelling level, both in terms of getting these projects off the ground, but sort of exploring narratively?
I think it's very exciting creatively to find out what it is that people love about a certain IP. What is it that makes them want to share it or do more with it? And then see, can we do an immersive event? Can we make this into a film? Can we make a podcast? Can we, there's so many, can we do a little show on YouTube? What is it that we can do with this? And then look at where is it most successful and then double down on that. And I think that's basically what you discovered with making back the money on the game. You gotta feel it and then double down.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, to the point of like where the wind blows that's very true. And what diversifying your path takes, I don't know, for me, it's taken a lot of different partnerships. I can't do it by myself. Whether it's television, it's a completely different medium, set of contacts, set of people who kind of access that world. Gaming is exactly the same, but it's radically different. And we're now migrating into like full computer games. But along that journey, which has taken a couple of zigzags in the path, what it's enabled me to do is kind of embrace the stories I want to tell as a filmmaker. And if you, by diversifying and enabling the ship to keep sailing, that has then slowly, the groundswell of development material behind me has grown wider and wider, and it's really defined the creative vision of the company. So by just keeping on making things, which is the really important thing, that's what it's enabled me to do. Diversification has enabled me to run a business, grow a business, and keep on making stories, and that's just really important. You just got to practice, and yeah.
It's also a great. Sorry, were you going to say something? It's a great way to train people up. So, you know, if you have a huge IP, but you're also doing a small YouTube show or you're doing a podcast, and it's an entry point for the new young workforce to come in and learn and be able to put a big name on their CV and yet learn from the big people. And I think, you know, we're always wondering, especially with AI coming in, how are the young people going to get trained up? Or this is how they're going to get trained up as they get to work on all, you know, we're going to diversify across so many different media with every IP going forward with AI. So that's, you know, we let our interns, they run our AI YouTube channel. I mean, they do better than some of our senior creatives because they're just making these AI kids music videos. They get 30,000 views in a day without doing anything. Wow. But they're training up, they're understanding it, and they can move that knowledge across.
Do any of you have any advice for how to represent yourself as a platform agnostic creator in a way that feels cohesive? Like if you're doing all of these sort of different things, and maybe for, you know, your interns, what's a good way to make that cohere?
For me, you know, we're just finishing a film with Disney now, and the British Film Institute also helped on that, as did Film 4. That is a Black American piece of intellectual property based on a Walter Mosley novel. We're also doing a television series set in West Africa in Lagos, Nigeria. And that's where my dad's from, so that's something close to my heart. On the gaming side, we're doing 2 West African computer games, which are storytelling kind of rich, and that's what we can give to it, but are also hiring quite large teams of computer programmers, makers, the general thing that you need to make a graphics-led computer game. So the kind of cohesive theme, going back to the kind of creative, is this type of stories that I want to tell and the opportunity I see in the stories that I'm interested in and what hasn't been told before. That's the cohesion. That is it. But they're all like very different. But you do get to kind of leapfrog them between things, and not everything is right for every platform. And that's, I don't know, we could talk all day about that, and I won't. But that's just the thing. You just sit with a story and you analyze it, and you get advice from a lot of people, and you try and listen, really, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, as John pointed out, like not all stories are suitable for all mediums, but without development, you know, like you can't just take something straight away and apply it to anything, any different medium. But I think it is possible to be a storyteller across mediums, and I think it's more possible than it ever has been, just purely because of the technology that's available. But you know, we've adapted books, we've adapted or are adapting things that are TV shows already, and there's just a process that goes through that where you need some expertise. And you know, I think it's interesting that, you know, you partnered with a games company quite early on, and I think that's important to bring people in of these different backgrounds to enable that step forward. You know, we worked with writers from film and TV quite early on, and they were very focused on linear storytelling. That was like a real thing that they wanted to try and get across, and they didn't necessarily understand the strengths of an interactive medium.
I'm going to hang a lantern on that thought, and we'll come back to it around trying to, you know, bring film and TV folks into more non-linear storytelling. But let's tuck into, you know, choosing a medium, which all of you have somewhat touched upon. But when you have the seed of an idea, how do you decide what output, what form that's going to take, and what considerations do you have?
Whatever you can afford.
Yes, correct.
Start with whatever you can afford, whether it's a podcast, a series online. You know, I've taken stuff that started as like a live performance on the street, which was a character called Miss Holland that I did, which is like a female Borat character that would go around. I mean, this is in my early 20s. And then that was a live street character. We then took it to a show on Daily Motion where we did short clips. We then took it to YouTube. And then it got picked up by BBC Three. It became a series on BBC Three. And we had started with 5-minute episodes, and then we had a half hour. So you can go the full way across. And, you know, I then retired the character for a bit because I was done with it after 10 years. But you could take that further and further and further if you like.
I would imagine too that, those maybe shorter form things or early things become kind of proof of concepts as you're trying to develop the story as well.
Yes, so this is how they always sell it to you. They're like, oh, we're going to do lots of short form digital things and then they're going to grow into long form. But actually, very few people believe that short form can grow into long form because they're like, oh, it's contained. And I absolutely do think you can grow short form to long form, but it does need development.
And Neil, could you speak to, you were saying, how do you basically choose your medium working at a transmedia company?
Yeah, we've, we in the game side of the business, we see scripts a lot that come from the film and TV side, and we always kind of try and sit and think like, how would this be? And the affordability point is a very valid point. Just because something is digital doesn't mean it's cheaper. In actual fact, a lot of the time it isn't. When I was working at Channel 4 and we were doing games there, we did a game based on Made in Chelsea, which was very successful, unfortunately. And we would, spend a couple of months recreating the environments, the real environments. We would get sign off from the owners of the bars and restaurants, and we'd recreate them. And then we would get a note saying, "Oh, we've cut that scene's now been completely cut. It's not. You shouldn't put it in the game anymore. We've rescinded kind of authorization to use it." And it's like, well, that was 3 months for you guys to just press delete on some scenes. Those kind of things have a real impact, and you have to kind of really plan around it. We've had scripts that have come in that have been about like financial crime, and you can sit there and think, actually, that could be a really cool concept for a game, like more of puzzle based, like following a story through financial records and all this kind of stuff. And then you're like, well, that's probably not what people want from that. People are probably looking for something a little bit more explosive, and that becomes expensive. So finding the right medium for the right story is important, and I think cost does come into it, ability comes into it, time comes into it.
What I also think is really interesting is going from short form to long form is that I would employ short form specialists to work on the long form, because I think people's attention span is so short nowadays that on a long form program, even if you have a half hour or an hour, you need someone writing that is going to every 2-3 minutes is going to keep you on the ball and is going to do something that's going to shock you, which is what a short form producer or a writer is really good at. And so and then obviously you need the long form narrative, but working together.
Yeah, just going back to the thing of budget, I think opportunity is, it's interesting. I've said this before, but like to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and to a producer, everything looks like a film. And that's kind of where you start, is it's a movie. And so what that did on 2 of our films is we had a film called The Machine, which did quite well. And it became the most pirated movie in the world for like 2 weeks on release on torrents, which was great on one hand, but again, it made no money out of it, which you can see a theme here. So what happened though was Universal then came on board and said, we pitched them, and they came on board and said, look, we'll make this into a TV series. 2.5 years later, we were on set and we got given like $9 million to make a pilot. Now, we leaned on their infrastructure massively. We'd never made TV before. We'd never had a go at it. And that was just an opportunity. It was an opportunity that presented itself, which of course anyone in this room would have taken. Don't Knock Twice was another film that turned into a game, and the opportunity was Film Cymru kind of put me and the head of the studio together that ended up making the game, and then offered to kind of give some seed money in terms of trying to make sure that they were getting paid for developing this kind of first stage of the game. The risk wasn't on us because I couldn't have afforded to do that, and it was like £50,000, I think, was the first seed money for it. But that enabled them to dedicate time to it, and us to get the first stage of a game out of it. And that game then tested so well, they built the other 4 levels of it, and that became really successful. So it was kind of, and both of those are leaning on other people's money and other people's skill sets, and that was kind of what gave that foundation stone to being able to be agnostic between those areas.
Do you think that there are certain genres that lend themselves better to certain mediums? I'm thinking, for example, I know that you've done an Agatha Christie adaptation, which I'd love for you to speak about, but if there are any other examples you can think of where a genre is maybe a no-go for a particular medium?
I don't know. I think in games over the last decade or so, I think they've, as an industry, has grown tremendously to the point where you can tell stories that you wouldn't have expected to find in a game. You know, games have moved past that point where it was very much where they were games. You know, now they are known for being storytelling mediums. Now you can find games that are about all manner of subjects, whether it be like working as a border crossing agent and, you know, having to deal with difficult choices over who you do and don't let into the country. Like that's a game that was very successful called Papers, Please, which took a lot of people by surprise.
Can I just add to
Sure.
that? So that's a really great game he's talking about there. That like single person, you know, made it in their bedroom basically. Don't know if that's true, but it's a little game. Made a fortune for the person who did it. It's a nondescript country that you're a border guard in, and this is the key thing I learned transitioning film creative to gaming is that you can make Schindler's List as a film, you can't make Schindler's List as a game because it's not fun to play and it's weird to put a point system on graduating through levels in a situation like that. Now they've kind of anonymized it in that by making it a nondescript country, and of course it's not about the Holocaust, but it's about a serious subject matter. So they're pushing against that in gaming, but there is a point where I haven't seen it done successfully where it breaks out yet. And you know, a lot of the reason we're filmmakers is to tackle social issues and characters and, you know, broader problems in, you know, in life. And that is like a key difference. There's like, yeah, you don't want stuff that's too heavy in a game, basically, because it's not very fun. Yeah.
Can you do comedy or musical theatre in gaming?
There's actually quite a successful game came out this year or last year called Stray Gods, which is a musical. It was
Check it out.
yeah, it's worth looking at.
And is there a good comedy game? Because it's usually quite dramatic, the ones I've come across at least.
I think that yes, I think it's a harder thing to do. Again, games cost a lot of money, and I don't think people realize how much, like, when the big breakout games are like The Last of Us or, you know, God of War, these kind of things, those are multiple hundreds of millions to make to get anything close to that. And for the most part, a lot of the successes recently have been smaller, they've been crowdfunded, they've been smaller teams. And when that's the case, you don't get a full voiceover cast and you don't get professional writing, you don't get all those kind of elements that can kind of add together to make something, you know, that made to be able to deliver on a comedic experience in the traditional way you might imagine. There are games that can tell jokes, but they are not so much like vocalized jokes, you know. It's kind of the more experience. There's classical games like Monkey Island, which is like a very humorous experience, and a lot of people try to emulate that style of thing. In games where it's done through the puzzles, it's done through the things you discover, it's done through the environments that you go through, that kind of thing.
It's interesting because to what you're all saying, it seems like, yeah, some genres do work and some genres don't. But I do think from an immersive level of the sort of MO of a lot of storytellers is to stir conversation and change opinions and such, then I would imagine that more interactive mediums might be a good place to sort of tackle complex topics and build empathy. But I suppose there's a balance there of it needs to feel like you want to live in that world. Is that safe to say?
I think so. I don't fully agree that games can't be serious. There are some good examples out there. There's a notable game called This War of Mine, which is, I believe, made by a Ukrainian studio long before the Ukrainian invasion, but it's about basically people surviving after a war and what they have to do to survive after a war, like what you have to do to look after your family in that situation. It was incredibly successful because it was a very heavy experience that people, it's not for everyone, but that's the kind of experience you tell people you just had. You have to have this experience. You have to play this. And it did very well from that. Again, like Papers, Please, it's that kind of thing where you think it's kind of fun. You're going through your stamping papers, like you're looking for discrepancies, and then you realize the reality of what you're doing is denying people a chance at life. And then that becomes an incredibly heavy experience to go through.
I suppose it depends too on how you gamify it, but then how you map out the stories. As you said, you don't want it to be like a leveling up experience, but what are those sort of nodes of interactivity? For anyone who's in more of the linear sense of things, how might you go about mapping out a story in a more nonlinear way? Where do you start with that?
Oh, wow. So our entry point in was we did a film called The Complex, and this was the first thing I learned in gaming in terms of having to structure our own games. It was based on a contained linear script that is a traditional first feature film for a director. Contained location, limited people in it, sci-fi concept. We then had to adapt that and break it out into multiple story arcs to make it a nonlinear experience. And essentially what we did was we created a 5-act structure with 4 inflection points in the acts. So Act 1 starts at a dot, it branches out in 3 different ways. Those 3 different ways branch back in to a point which you have to get to, because if it keeps on going like that, you're never going to get to an ending, which you can write enough to do that and shoot enough to be able to complete the game. So we kind of had to find a way to contain what was a wide-ranging, seeming interactive game. So you come out and back in, and that's what we did. Now that structure was the first way that we kind of attacked it, and it was based on something that was linear, and that's how we made it manageable for ourselves. It was still 300 pages. Like, it was a significant amount of stuff to shoot, and you're using all the tricks you normally use as a filmmaker, because we were filming that with actors, and then it goes into an engine and becomes a kind of interactive experience. That's how we did our first one. That was the easiest one. They've become a lot more complicated since then, and since we've moved into graphics and what we do, the best way to kind of learn about this stuff really is to check out visual novels online. They're the most simple storytelling experiences that you'll find within the gaming world, and they do what they say on the tin. They're slightly animated, but not a lot. Quite often, a series of images and quite beautiful images that take you through a story. Sometimes with music, sometimes with dialogue, sometimes without. And they're quite a good way to study it if you're really interested in it. That's like level 1. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's a very easy task. Neil, I wanted to ask you about Hercule Poirot, the London case, because that also, obviously there's existing IP, and I would think something Agatha Christie, the information gaps you can bring in and the way you breadcrumb info to the audience, like it really would lend itself well to transposition to another medium. Could you talk about that project a bit and how it came about?
Sure. Quite a few years ago now, we started talking to Agatha Christie Limited about trying to do something in the gaming space. I think they were very keen to move into that space. Obviously there's like a wealth of stories there. There's the history of that character is rich, and we went back to them with a proposal that we would actually write an original story rather than adapting a story. We didn't want to do something that people already knew the end to. Certainly from a player's perspective, knowing what the kind of final conclusion of it is probably less interesting. So we found a point in his life in one of the short stories where, this event happened, and we're like, could we build something around this where he's still a detective in Belgium before he came to the UK? And they were okay with it, so we wrote basically a kind of spec of what it would be, and they were really supportive. But it comes with its challenges, not just because you're working with an existing character that has there's certain limitations of what you can and can't do. They were very open with a lot of things, but even just from a player perspective, the challenge there, you're asking the player to not just follow a detective story, you're asking the player to be a detective in the story. And that means that you have to create certain rules. And some of our rules were that the player can never know more than the character, and the character can never know more than the player. You cannot cut away to a scene and have 2 people talking in another room, because then Poirot doesn't know that's happened, and you now know more than him, and he cannot know things that you don't know. So you have to be really careful about how you navigate all of that. to allow players to feel the satisfaction of solving something, not be told what the answer is, and to never frustrate the player by having them know who the culprit is when the main character doesn't. So you've got to keep controlling them through a series of events you already know have happened. So there's a lot of balancing that you have to do there to create something. So we came up with a system where you basically can go into Poirot's head, and we have these mind maps where you're connecting these kind of nodes, these little grey cells within his head to kind of form deductions. So we're asking the player at all times, tell us that you understand what's going on. This is all the information that Poirot has. Now you make the connection, and then it's the two of you working together to push forward in this story. So we've done 2 now. We won a Scottish BAFTA for the first one, the first cases, which was the kind of his first whodunit experience that he went through in Belgium, and then we just did another one set in London, which was his first time going to London. So it's a fun thing to do, fun to engage with the fan base. There are especially when it comes to detective games, there's like a very rabid fan base of people that like those stories, and there's a lot of people that take the canon and history of Poirot very seriously. So it's fun to engage and find that audience that you can kind of bounce off of.
What I think is really interesting is I think it's all a question of human capability. So we started out, forever humans have told stories verbally. Then we were able to write them down. And we loved the worlds that we create. Then we started making films, short films first, then longer films. Now we're making, a series of, which basically should have been a film, like Succession is now, I don't know how many episodes each series is. And I think the next logical step in creating that world for humans, and yes, it's a really complex matter, but is creating these games where these stories are told in an even more complex way. And it's just what our brains are capable of producing, I think. And hopefully AI will help us to do this next step, because it is complex.
Yeah, and the AI question, even more complex. In terms of, so that was interesting what you were saying around Agatha Christie and that being a recognizable character with Poirot, and with Genshin Impact, you were also working, Eline, on kind of filling out the world that already existed through the guise of the game. We have a clip that we can show. I'm not sure who I'm making eye contact to, but we're going to roll the clip now, and then we'll have you talk about that. So could you tell us some more context around what we just watched, how that fits into the world?
Yes, so I think this is the reverse thing as what we were talking about before, where we're trying to make everything bigger and more complex. This is the opposite. We're taking a really complex game and we're using other media, this is just on YouTube, to take parts of the story. And people have love this piece of music. They've gamed to it for hours and hours. And we've put in elements of there's European influences in this world, there's a lot of water, there are boats, and so all those elements are brought back into this additional content that we create for them outside of the game. And so I think it goes both ways, and people will want everything. They'll want stories, they'll want books, they'll want TV series, they'll want films additional to the game, and YouTube clips and stuff. Yeah.
And on an audience level, and anyone can answer this who's worked with sort of existing IP before, but did you find that the the audience between the game and then the music videos were pretty well one and the same, or were there any surprises there?
Oh yeah, it's 100% probably the gamers. I'm sure there's some other music lovers that will want to watch it, but I think it is very much for the fans that this is created.
For us, it's been quite different. We did this Don't Know Twice, which I mentioned earlier. The film, did like $4 million at the box office, or just under. So it did, quite a lot of people had seen it around the world, kind of thing, and on home entertainment. And our plan was that we would leverage any success the film had then to do exactly that, to migrate that audience over to a game, and hopefully those people who saw the film and liked it would buy the game, being the simplistic ambition of it. It turned out it didn't work out like that at all. The game launched, it was very different. It was a completely different audience. There was people in the comments who were really genuinely surprised it even was a film, and the film predated the game. There was hardly any crossover between the audiences that we could see, which was super interesting. One, because it kind of showed that good IP is good IP, good stories are good stories, and that will kind of carry across and migrate, and people will like that potentially in different silos. But also as an education that the audience won't cannibalize itself, so it isn't necessarily the case that because I've spent the money on that, I won't then, I won't be able to access an audience for the game because that money's already been taken from the audience. So yeah, that was my experience of.
I think that's also true because, like Dune, for example, many people watched and loved the film, haven't played the game, right? So
Yeah.
you can create it for the different silos.
Yeah.
Neil, you were talking before about your goal to bring in more games audiences. What do you see as some of the roadblocks to that? And I guess more generally, how do you find an audience for game, immersive, whatever, who might not be familiar with that medium previously?
It's I think games are always at a slight disadvantage, or have been historically, because of the cost of entry a lot of the time. As in, you want to play The Last of Us because you liked a TV show, cool, just buy a £400 console, a £50 game, and a £50 a year subscription for the online service, that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit of blockage there, but I do think what I've seen in certainly my lifetime, and what I see more and more now, is that people are growing up alongside games, and there is more of an expectation that something will exist in a gaming space, and people are a lot more accepting of it now at certain age groups. Historically, it hasn't always been that way, that games are always kind of more of a younger person's thing, or again, like I was saying before, that kind of 16 to 35-year-old male demographic, that's who you've got to serve. That's who the people that spend the money on games, you've got to go to them. I think it is changing a little bit more. Like Genshin Impact is a game that's predominantly played on mobile. That is, when I went to Channel 4, the idea was that mobile is a little bit of a Trojan horse. Like, everyone has one in their pocket. Can we do something here that will attract anyone that has a phone in their hand? Like, you don't need to understand how to hold a controller. Like, if I handed my mother a PlayStation controller, it'd be like her handing me a guitar and asking me to play something, right? That's how foreign that is. So the idea of kind of reducing those barriers, one of the projects that we did at PlayStation was called PlayLink, where we basically removed the need for a controller. It was your mobile phone became the controller. So anyone that had a phone in their pocket could play any of these games together. That was like the idea, like, how do we remove barriers? How do we make content for people? One of the projects we did was called That's You, and it was like a kind of family, like a friends group family kind of party experience. But all of the artwork that was used and all the art that was created, we brought people in from like the film and TV industry. We had like the production designer from the Grand Budapest Hotel did like all of the props, and everything was designed like a set, and all of the content in it was meant to be relatable to any demographic. It wasn't traditional game space fantasy. It wasn't space. It wasn't all of these kind of sci-fi elements. It was, how do we pull things back to recognizable, normal things that everyone will understand and no one will be kind of put off by. Just in mobile space when we were starting out in there. And I think traditionally still, the most popular things are still anything related to football, anything related to racing, anything related to a real thing. As soon as you put a game element in there where it's like you're on another planet fighting aliens, a lot of people just turn off from that. So it's trying to find real stories that are relatable to more people is a big thing.
And then also, as you say, getting over the additional hurdle of people not only need to be interested by the game or the interactive thing that they're going to do, but then also get used to the platform, learn how to play, get used to the device and everything. I'm just going to ask another question, and I'd love to open up to you guys in a moment. So do think of your questions. So we've sort of been dancing around this, but I'm interested in talking a bit more about the attention economy. And, you know, we talk a lot these days about how people are paying attention, our attention spans, watching something on the big screen while you've got your phone in your hand. And so our attention is just being split in every direction. How are you thinking about attention when it comes to choosing the medium for your story? It's a big question. Some attention theory to round it up.
I just think it's changing quite a lot. I heard recently that some exec was like, oh, this isn't double screen enough. So, you know, the half-hour programming needs to repeat the plot so many times because people are on their phone, and so otherwise they can't keep track of the story. I mean, it's terrible, but it is the world we live in, and people are on their phones when they're watching a TV series. So either you got to make it really complicated so they have to put it away, or you have to just repeat it over and over again. And I think they're finding that the ones that you can follow whilst also on your phone are the most successful ones because people just have them on in the background. So I just think it's changing massively, and we have to adapt, unfortunately, to the new attention spans.
I think we're kind of lucky in video games that games are about engagement for the most part. Like, you have to be engaged. I will admit to playing certain games and having a TV show on the background as well. Like, that is a more common thing now. But games do demand attention when they're skill-based. Games do demand attention when you have to be physically inputting something. It's not a passive medium. So I think you're lucky in that sense. But that is also can be a little bit of a put off now. Like, we do see it with certain people, certain age groups, people that actually want something that's a little bit more passive and a little bit more, they don't have to invest that much time and effort into. You know, we've moved into a territory of what people call like hardcore games, which are games that require you to actually, if you blink for a second, you're going to lose. So you have to really put the effort into them. And that appeases a certain audience.
Yeah, I think that it just depends what medium you're in. You know, I completely agree. Games is easier to get people's attention because it's often one person playing, you know, or at least one person in a room. There may be many other people around the world playing simultaneously, but there's that. It demands attention because you have to interact. There's feature films, which if you're sat in a cinema, of course, you're demanding attention there and you don't really have to worry about it. But if it's going to go on to home entertainment, then all these other things bleed in. And it might be another screen, or it might be doing the ironing, or feeding the cat, or putting the daughter to bed, or whatever it is, you know. And that's just something you've got to cope with on home entertainment. I was always taught. I directed a block of doctors a long time ago in my career, and was always taught it's basically radio. You know, you just have to keep saying the same thing as you said, and you have to be able to do it without any pictures. Because don't take it for granted that someone's actually watching; they might just be listening. And I always remembered that. I was like, "That's super interesting." And so it just depends on the medium. I think that one of the things that excites me about the blend and the convergence between television, film, and gaming right now is that within gaming, stories have become just a lot more developed. And it shows that people have got a hunger for emotional connection with a game. It shows that people have got a hunger, albeit it might be in broken stages, but they've got a hunger for a narrative and a connection to a narrative, which may be served in many, many sittings, but ultimately there is an arc there, and there is a journey to take those people on. And it's demonstrable in the numbers that you see. You know, the storytelling within gaming sector is growing at a much more rapid pace than any other type of gaming that I have personally done analysis on. So, like, gaming is growing, like, I don't know, in terms of revenue, like 8-9% a year. Storytelling and gaming from our internal company analysis is growing at about 20% a year in terms of the money that you get from that sector. And of course, that represents people's hunger and appetite. And yeah, that's what we try and serve.
Great. Did you want to add to that before?
Well, it was just, I didn't know that you guys approached it from a radio perspective, but that is so true. I got addicted to, what's it called? Marriage at First Sight. And I used to just turn the video off, obviously in the car, and drive and just listen to it. And it was excellent. But it just sort of shows that, it doesn't really matter. The medium can be, even if it's made as a TV series, you can just listen to it as radio and it works. And that means it's successful.
I mean, having come from Netflix, you don't really, there's a lot of conversation around passive watching versus like super active watching. And as a filmmaker, you don't necessarily set out to make something that people are like doing their laundry or whatever they are. But that is just the reality of it, that you kind of need to, which then goes into the narrative and how you develop these things, like repeating characters' names or that sort of thing. It's fascinating. We're going to open up to you guys. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand. There's one. Just wait for the mic here.
Hello. Ms. van der Velden, you mentioned the short attention span, and I suppose we see the blockbuster films, they tend to be much longer now, at least June, series becoming much longer, narratives in gaming, as John was mentioning. How do you strategize towards the shorter attention span that you were talking about in choosing projects?
So I think you have different people and different desires, right? Obviously, there's a huge desire for this super long form stuff. And I would say a film is with a cinematic release is very different because people will be there watching it. So you have their attention. So you can make it. But perhaps if you're working on TV and they're doing lots of stuff and you have to repeat it, it is good to work with short form writers. So you get that repetition, you get that quick. Also, if you're just paying attention for 2-3 minutes to the TV series, you get a laugh or you get some sort of reward out of it, something solved. So I think the long form that we watch now is actually a compilation of short form scenes that work really well in their own right. I can't speak for June. I'm not the demographic.
There's a question right at the back, and then we'll come to you.
Hello, I am Ken Anderson from Scotland, and we have a property which is called Tom Gates. It's a book property. We've made it into a TV series. It's animated. We're currently developing a live-action feature film. We're talking to theatre companies about adaptation, including immersive theatre. I note that you're mostly talking about what would be termed probably as grown-up games here, it seems. So what are the challenges that adaptation into kids' content that you think? Because sitting down trying to think about how do we adapt this children's property, what's the market like for the ages of 6 to 12 is fiendish in my experience. So I'd love to hear what you think.
When I was at PlayStation, we were, again, part of audience broadening was, okay, we're going to bring younger people in. And we did a lot of research, and we would go out to like houses and we would talk to families and like, how do your kids play? Like, how do they interact with video games? And I think we only ever found one family who actually understood like video game age ratings and like how to set parental controls on a console. And that was the only kid who didn't get to play games with his friends because he wasn't allowed to buy Grand Theft Auto, wasn't allowed to buy Call of Duty. Basically, what we kind of came to the conclusion of is that children don't actually want to play children's games. It's like parents a lot of the time are the ones that want them to play these games, but they want to play what their friends are playing. And that is what you're seeing now a lot. Like some of the most popular stuff for kids is Roblox and Fortnite. And that has like a massive variation of content and massively kind of age group is kind of pretty all over the place for that. But it's a social experience, and that's like a big part of it. We did make a kids game, and we made it massively overcomplicated. And at the same time, we released a companion app that was very popular at the time, like small companion games. And that was like hugely successful, millions of units, because all it was just you could poke a dog and it would say funny things and you could put a hat on it. And it was just like a novelty toy. The game that required like 6 hours of investment, like kids were just like not interested. I'm not going away by myself for 6 hours with this. I think it's an interesting thing. Like what we found is that if you're trying to sell to kids, like social is better, family involvement is better. Like the Bluey game that just came out was a huge success because it's like a 4-player game. So like most parents I know were like, I got that so I could play it with my kids. They all play the Lego games because you can play it 4-player, so I play it with my kids. I think it's a hard sell to actually get a kid to find a game, be interested in it, unless all their friends are interested in it, in which case it needs to be like a much bigger, cultural phenomenon, let's say.
Can you get Bluey on PlayStation?
Yes.
I'm not sure to be happy or sad about that.
You've had a question for a bit. Thank you.
I guess to follow the last question, kind of, I wanted to ask about age demographics because I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess that the main audience for interactive media goes to maybe 30, 35-year-olds, something like this. And I was wondering if you actually found that other age groups are interested in this sort of media, and if you try to get to them, or do you just focus on the main audience?
So, when I came into gaming, I assumed it was kind of teenage boys and 20-year-old boys in their bedrooms mainly playing. The average game player's age is 35. And there's a massively high quantity of people actually who are like 50 plus playing. It's roughly evenly split between women and men.
They're playing Sudoku, aren't they?
Who, the women?
The 50-year-olds. They're not playing Fortnite.
Yeah, probably not playing Fortnite.
Because that's the thing, the definition of game is so, like Scrabble or Sudoku would classify it.
Yeah. But yeah, I was really surprised at that because it means, of course, you are telling different types of stories to hit those age and confidently telling them. You're not like, I hope it'll find an audience. Like there's definitely an audience there. But obviously it requires a lot of research. Otherwise, you might be combating against Sudoku. And
but it is all the social thing, right? Like I think the reason the boys all gravitate towards certain games is because their mates are doing it, exactly like what you're saying. But currently, I don't have a group of friends that are playing a certain game. But I'm sure if they did, I would start playing that game. And that's why I've played Sudoku or Scrabble, because my parents wanted me to play with them. But I must say that, there isn't currently, and I'd love to know if you guys have an answer to this, like 40 plus sort of women, what are they playing? And what's socially like bringing them together?
Socially bringing them together, I don't know. What are they playing is The Sims. They're all playing The Sims. There was like an event like 30 plus years ago, 40 years ago, when games consoles came out. And when games consoles came out, games became toys. Prior to that, games were on PC, and the only people that had PCs were adults. So a lot of games that were being made, like LucasArts, were really big in games at that point because they were making games that were like serious narrative. They were new entries in the Indiana Jones series, The Dig, which was like a fantastic Steven Spielberg video game. Like that was happening back then, point and click narrative adventures that adults were playing. Sims, like Theme Hospital, that kind of stuff, adults were playing. And then games became about kids because consoles were being sold like toys. There is a huge demographic of older people who haven't been served for like 40 years. And a friend of mine calls them the sleeping giant because he's like, they're coming back. Like if you can serve them, they will buy things. And a story like Theme Hospital was a hugely successful game when people loved like theme games. The developers that made that original one tried to get funded a new one like about 10 years ago or so. Couldn't get funding. Everyone was like, no one wants to play that anymore. So they did it themselves. They basically made a prototype themselves and they got funding. And it was one of the most successful games that year. And they got purchased by Sega after that, their publisher. It was a huge success because they made basically a spiritual successor to this old game that was primarily targeted at 40 plus people basically used to play games. So there is an audience there. Just finding them is interesting.
That's super interesting too. Time for one quick final question.
Hi, yeah, I'm a linear storyteller, and an important part of the impact of that is that the stories resolve. Are the narratives that you tell in games really stories?
Yes.
Just because something doesn't resolve doesn't mean it's not a story either, does it?
But you lose the impact of it resolving.
I mean, I don't know.
So
Comes
I,
to
for
a
example,
conclusion.
watched Severance on Apple Plus. That didn't resolve after the first season. I'm very angry about it. But like, it's still a story.
But if you
and-
watch The Graduate, if that story didn't resolve, it wouldn't have the same power. If Mrs.
I
Robinson
agree.
chased down the road after the bus and pulled Ben out of it, then it wouldn't be the same thing. And you could go on and on like that, and then it could be a game. It could have different platforms. But it just, for the power of it to resolve, it needs to be a linear story.
But the
Fact.
the money runs out if you resolve it, so they don't. The companies don't want it to be
So
resolved.
it's a money thing.
I would say the resolving or not resolving is a money thing.
Look, I think that you can craft a number of endings for a story that are satisfactory. That's one way of doing it, and you can try and do that, and it's quite an intense way to develop things. Or there are, stories which I don't know how many games you play, but there are stories that do resolve in a really satisfying way that make people cry. And actually, that was quite surprising to me when I heard that, and I was a little bit cynical about it, if I'm honest, because there is a degree of snobbery with film towards gaming, and meanwhile, gaming has exploded, and like we've all been sitting here making our films thinking we're the best thing since sliced bread, and they have just become a behemoth that is so massive, and that to me was quite humbling as I realised this layer by layer that you can create. It's just a different medium, it's just a different thing, and you just got to embrace what it is, and I think there are. I love feature film, I will always have a deep passion for that, and it'll probably always be my foundation stone emotionally of what I want to do. But then there's this other thing, and loads of people really like it.
And I think there's sort of a difference between like resolution and maybe unpacking what that means, and then emotional payoff. And to your point, I mean, games and other mediums are just full of emotional payoff. It can bring people to tears or make them feel all sorts of ways. Well, there's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of storytelling ground to explore. So I think we'll leave it there, but thank you guys for coming, and thank you so much for your insights.
Wave.